Awesome, we are live now. And I see quite a few people are coming in. Here we go. Thank you for joining. We will get started shortly. We're just waiting for a couple more people to log in. Thank you for taking the time to join us today for the Lunch and Learn webinar. We've got quite a few people already logged in, and we're just waiting to get all of our attendees in before we get started. Awesome, we're just waiting on a couple more people. Okay, we will get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us today for the Lunch and Learn webinar. I just want to start off by acknowledging, doing a land acknowledgement, sorry. The Richmond Chamber of Commerce operates on the traditional territory of the Musqueam First Nation. They have lived on this land for millennia, and we are grateful that we can gather here today. And I would like to acknowledge the traditional territories that you may be joining us from. So before we begin, I would like to go over some housekeeping items with you. Everyone will be on mute. We are encouraging questions today. You can submit them in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. If you run into any issues, please pop that into the chat, and I will respond and address any of those issues. Again, please feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. We will address them towards the very end, and we will end the presentation, the webinar at 1 p.m. But before then, you can ask as many questions as you like. And then now that we're done with the housekeeping items, I would like to introduce our presenter for today, Tracey Pham. Tracey is the export advisor for the Vancouver Lower Mainland at Export Navigator. Tracey has over a decade of experience in international business. She has worked in Southeast Asia, West Africa, and has lived and worked in BC since 2014. Given her work in sectors such as consumer products, financial services, and agri-foods, she is well-versed in helping a wide range of businesses export. Tracey has helped businesses find success by entering key global markets in Asia, Pacific, Europe, and the Middle East. As an export advisor at Export Navigator, Tracey helps businesses identify their growth strategy through exporting and guides them along the export journey. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Tracey Pham.
Thank you so much, Alina. Welcome everybody to the webinar today. I'm really glad to be able to spend this hour with you and talk to you about the export essentials. I'm coming to you also from the unceded and traditional territories of the Coast Salish people. So the Musqueam, the Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And I myself feel very grateful every single day that I'm able to live and play in this beautiful land. Okay, so before we start, I would like to do a really quick poll just to get an idea of who is in the room today. And so, Alina, I wonder if we can launch the couple of poll questions that we've prepared for our audience.
You should be able to see the first poll on your screen now. The poll is selling outside of BC. So are you currently selling outside of BC? Just give a few more minutes for people to pop in their answers. Okay. And all right, that is our first poll. And then I will okay, and then we'll launch the second poll. So the second one is, are you currently selling outside of Canada? Okay, just give a few more people to answer. Perfect. Okay.
Amazing. Great. Thank you so much for that, Alina, and thank you everybody for participating in the poll. So I have a relatively good idea of who's in the room, and I think that for the audience, it sounds like most of the people in the room are relatively new to selling outside of BC as well as outside of Canada. There may be a couple of people who are selling across the border and assume maybe to the US or other countries. But I think with that, the understanding of the audience, I think the content of the webinar will be very relevant for you, and I hope that you find it relevant. But I'm going to dive in right now. And so Alina has done an introduction of myself, which thank you again. So like she mentioned, I am the export advisor for Export Navigator for the Lower Mainland in Vancouver. And so my key territories are Vancouver, the city of Vancouver, Richmond, and Delta. In our network of advisors, we have 13 people like myself across the province. And so there will be other advisors as well in other areas of the Lower Mainland, as well as other parts of the province. And so personally, I have had the privilege to work in international business for most of my career. And so I've worked in Singapore, I've worked in Ghana, and for the last 10 years, I've worked and lived in BC. And so I have experience across sectors with some of the main areas that I focused on include agri-foods, fintech, and consumer products. And so I have worked with companies exporting the products to the US, to multiple countries in Asia, as well as to Europe. So in this presentation, what I am going to cover roughly in the agenda will be number one, getting ready to export. And so we will go over some challenges and opportunities. How do you get yourself ready for exporting and assessing your export readiness? And what are some of the available resources that you can tap in as you get ready for this process? And then we will go through in more details the process and the documentations. So what does an export process look like in general terms? What are the differences between agents, distributors? We talk about import duties, taxes, HS codes, free trade agreements, certificate of origins. So some of the very key concepts that you would need to learn as you start getting your products outside of Canada. And we will also touch on transportations and payment. And so talking about some of the logistical aspects of exporting, including freight forwarder, customs brokers, Incoterms, payment terms. And last but not least, next steps for you to take away in very actionable steps so that you can start building that export plan that will get you one step closer to being export ready. So why export? It's a very fundamental question, and I'm sure as you sit in this room, you have asked yourself this question before. And there are many challenges, obviously, right? It's not as easy as selling within BC, for example. You already know the language, the customs, you know the competitors in the market. So you understand a lot more about the local market versus exporting your product to a new market that require you to learn more about that market. And so you will have to dedicate time, dedicate resources to this endeavor, right? And there will also be competition that already exists in that market that you may or may not be already aware of. But on the other hand, exporting presents a lot of opportunities for a company, right? So we talked a lot about diversification. So when you are selling in one market, and if the economic climate is not so favorable in that market, it is really important that you have some diversification in your portfolio so that you can rely on another market as this current market is weathering some storms. And so having a diverse portfolio of places that you sell is a really important way to ensure the longevity and your sustainability of your business. And we also talk about economies of scale. So the more you sell, the cheaper you can buy your your input products, right? Like so your ingredients, your labor, the use of your machinery. And so there's a huge benefit in terms of economies of scale. And also when you start exporting and you start looking at different consumers, different customers in a different market, it also forces you to stay on top of your innovation, right? You know that your product is working well or your service is working well for the local market, but the competition might be harder, stiffer, more agile in a different market. And so it kind of forces you to stay on top of your innovation, which is a really great thing as well. And so here in this slide, I want to talk a little bit about export readiness, right? And so you are in the stage now when you're considering this prospect of exporting and you wonder, what do I need, right? How do I know if I'm ready? And so I work with a lot of clients in this stage where they sit down, and I sit down with them and I ask some key questions that after this webinar, you can also ask yourself, right? How do you know if you are ready? And I always look at this in 3 different areas. So I look at it as a personal readiness. So as you, as the founder, as the CEO, as the team, are you the one ready for this prospect of exporting, right? Like, are you feeling that you have enough capacity? Are you feeling like you have the stamina, you have the perseverance to embark on this journey? So that's the first assessment that I would do, is the personal assessment. And then you look at the business, right? You do a business assessment. So where is the business right now locally, right? In BC, in Canada, are you very well established here? So we always encourage businesses to have a strong foothold where they are before thinking about expanding, because this is where you, again, have the local market knowledge, have the local network. So it's really important that the business is well established locally before thinking about expanding. And then the next level of assessment that we talked about is the product service assessment. And so when thinking about exporting, you want to look at your product or the service that you're offering and think about how scalable is this product, right? Like, is this product made very specifically for the local market because of a local need, or you know that the product has wider appeal, has global appeal, and whether or not the product can be innovated or can be extended or can be adjusted should the need arise as it goes to other markets outside of the local market. So these are the really key elements that you want to ask as you embark on this process of exporting. Like we talked about the challenges, right? It is important for the business as they embark on this process and this journey is that they need to have a growth mindset, right? The founder, the team really need to embrace a growth mindset. Dedicating time and energy to this journey, to this project, and also, of course, money as well. You need funding. You need to make sure that you have enough capacity to fulfill orders. You need to have enough money to go to trade shows, to visit customers, to do marketings in a different market. And so these are all the critical elements as you determine whether or not exporting is the right growth strategy for you at this stage of your business. So there are many resources available. Obviously, I'm speaking to you as part of Export Navigator, but Export Navigator is a great resource for you to tap into. It is a government-funded program, so it is funded by both the provincial and the federal government. And so if you qualify for the program, it will be offered to you at no cost. And so what it is it is a one-on-one advisory service. So you would work directly with either myself or one of my colleagues. And yeah, we would be working with you to support you along the journey. There will also be support coming from Global Affairs Canada. So Global Affairs Canada has a team of trade commissioners. And so these trade commissioners are located in Canada, as well as in 160 countries around the world. And their mandate is to really help Canadian companies expand and export to other markets. So there will be some criteria for you to be able to work with a trade commissioner. However, they are a great resource, and I highly recommend that you check out the Trade Commissioner Service website for information and resources on exporting. There is also Export Development Canada, so they are a credit agency, but also a very well-respected research information hub as well. And so if you go to Export Development Canada website, there are a lot of information on trends, on businesses, climate, a lot of things that you can watch out for. And so I highly recommend checking out Export Development Canada as well. And then within the government of BC, you can also look at the Ministry of Jobs, Economic Development and Innovation, the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Fisheries. And then other resources include the Business Development Bank of Canada, and our website as well has a wealth of knowledge. And so if you go on exportnavigator.ca, there's an export resource directory that you can check out, and also sign up for our newsletter as well. And so this will be made available to you at the end of today's webinar, and you can take a look at these resources. But I highly recommend that you get on these websites and get on the newsletters so that you stay on top of the latest and greatest current news in the export world. So yes, since I was talking about Export Navigator, this is one of the example of a client that I've worked with. They are based in Half Moon Bay in BC. So how Export Navigator worked with them is really we recommended a number of programs that they qualify for. So for example, there are funding and grants that will allow you to travel overseas to do business development. And there will also be other funding specific to your category. So in their case, they've qualified for the Government of Canada Creative Fund, a Creative Export Fund. They've also qualified for Can Export for SMEs. And so they've been able to utilize a lot of these programs and fundings to expand their business. And so now they are in the US, very well established in the US, but also in certain countries in Europe as well. So that's the first part about the resources. Now I will go into more details about the export process. And so as a very high level kind of way to think about the exporting process, and this is international exporting, is that the goods will travel from you, who are the exporter or the supplier. It will go through the border of Canada. So this is the Canadian government agencies. And so once it crosses the borders of Canada, it will go through some sort of transportation, right? So that can be air freight, it could be ocean freight, it could be rail. It really depends on the nature of the product and the type of freight forwarding that you're using. And then once this product goes through this transportation process, it will most likely with some support of a customs broker that helps understand, the tariff, the duty requirement, the products will get to a foreign border service. And so let's say if you're going to the US, that will go through the US border customs. And so the products would need to be cleared through the US border customs services. And then once it crosses the border of the US, it goes to your importer. So this could be your agent, your distributor, your buyer. And so this is a very simple kind of way of visualizing when you are shipping goods across the border to another country. How does it look like? So agents, distributors, what's the difference between agents and distributors? I think I'm going to do this slide first. And so when you are thinking about selling your goods across the border, there are many different ways today, especially that you can do this. You can sell it yourself, right? You can do it direct to your consumers, which in my client portfolio, a lot of people are doing this. And so you have an online US store. I mean, the internet is global. So you just have an online US store that charges product in US dollars. And then once someone places an order, you can ship the product directly to the consumer. And so that is on a smaller scale, but on the slide, what I'm talking about is when you want to ship in large quantities. And so when you want to move container loads of products, right? So in that case, you want to work with either an agent or a distributor in the market. And so an agent, let's say if you want to sell, I'm just thinking out loud, like a recent example, you want to sell dog bandanas into the US, for example, right? And you want to ship a container of dog bandanas into the US. And so if you have an agent in the market, what they do is they are just a representative of yourself, right? They do not buy your products. They do not kind of do any warehousing for you. What they do is they would represent you in this market. And they can be very involved in the import process as needed, because usually the agent is in the foreign market. They have a good understanding of the industry, of the market that you're going after. They have a good understanding of the kind of the the requirements as well of exporting. And so but however, they're not responsible for the distribution costs, and they don't have any say in resale or retailing price. And so you sell through an agent. However, a distributor is a customer of yourself. And so if you sell to a distributor, they will buy your product. So they import the product, they control the selling price, and they will also be responsible for the after-sale service. So that is agent versus distributor, and there are different reasons why you want to use an agent and a distributor, and we can go into that into more detail if we work together. But how do you find agents or distributors, right? And so if you have a product that is working really well in Canada, you want to go to a different market, and you want to look for these people. Some of the main ways that I've seen people having success in doing this is they can do it through LinkedIn. And so some individuals are very well connected. And so LinkedIn is always a great way to do prospecting and trying to find potential agents or distributors that could be a good fit for you. Trade shows. So once you've determined that this is the right market, this is the right way of entering this market, then trade shows is a great way to meet distributors, meeting agents, meeting customers. And so it can be an expensive way of finding distributors or agents. However, again, there are some programs and some funding that you might be able to tap into to attend trade shows. And so this is one of the great strategies to, get yourself to the market. And you don't really have to even exhibit at the trade show. You can just walk the shows. And so one of the examples of trade shows that I would share is, for example, last March, so a few months ago, the Ministry of Jobs, Economic Development and Innovation, who is one of our key partners, they actually had a BC pavilion at the it's called the Natural Products Expo West. And so if you've not heard about it, Natural Products Expo West is the largest trade show for natural products in the US. And so the government of BC actually invests in having a pavilion to showcase BC companies. And so a number of Export Navigator clients end up getting a spot in this trade show, and they get to go and exhibit under the BC pavilion for a minimal cost. And so just as a for you to have an idea, if you go and exhibit yourself at a show like this, it would cost probably $10,000 for a booth. But if you go under the BC pavilion, that would be like a minimal, like nominal fee of maybe $750, for example. And so don't quote me on the exact numbers, but I would say that is a great way for you to tap into some resources and support from the government, for example, to be able to go to trade shows at a much lower cost. And it's, again, great way to meet distributors. The government also have some initiatives to do matchmaking, B2B kind of events, so that they can meet with potential distributors that way as well. And then, of course, in your personal network, right? When you know that you are going to want to export, you can also spread it through word of mouth using your own personal network. You can work with industry and trade associations. And so Chamber of Commerce, for example, is a great way as well to network and put the word out and see if someone in the similar industry have done it before, and they can recommend someone for you as well. And provincial and federal government offices in foreign markets. And so I think I mentioned the Trade Commissioner Service, but also BC has a Trade and Invest BC team. And so they also have around 20 offices around the world as well that support BC companies in kind of finding B2B clients, matchmaking. And so that's another great resource to tap in as well. So we talked about this. And so next topic I want to touch on is import duties and taxes. And so import, meaning importing into your foreign market. And so there is a system that is used internationally. It's called the Harmonized System Tariff. And so it's called, it's for short, it's called HS classification or HS code. And so once you start getting into the import-export world, you will get familiarized with this concept of HS code. And so if you go to the government website, so again, a Google search will show this, but I will also show you some example as well. But there is a very long document with multiple, about over 200 chapters that classify products to the best of its ability, of course, into this string of digits that basically will make sure that this is what your product falls under. It's a 10-digit code, right? And so what this code does is allowing different countries around the world to understand what this product is and what kind of import duties and taxes and fees this product is subject to. And so it is a very, it's a great system because when you export this product to one country, the HS code is the same as when you export it to a different country. The duties and the tariffs might be different because different countries have different rules and taxes, but the code remains the same. And so for this really short webinar, I'm going to do a very quick kind of exercise just to show you. In fact, I'm not going to do a demonstration because we might not have enough time. However, I did include a link here in the presentation. So after this webinar, I would encourage you to go through this link and try to find the HS code for your product. So for example, I did use an example in a longer webinar before, but you can just put in, for example, with this link, you can put in, let's say, again, dog bandana or dog food. And so it will break down into much further. So let's say dog food containing certain ingredients. And so you can keep clicking in these links. And then once you get to the 10-digit code, that will be your HS code. However, I would have to say that this is a very, very important code for importer exporter. And so the government, so the border officials, they are not gonna believe you or pardon you if you say, oops, I made a mistake, right? Like it is really important that you get the HS code right, because if you got it wrong and it falls into a different bracket for tax and duties and tariffs, and you end up paying less than what you're supposed to pay, there might be penalties. There will be penalties attached to that. And so I always encourage the client that I work with or any importers, exporters to make sure that you work with a customs broker to get the HS code, but also do the homework yourself, get yourself familiar with the different chapters, read through the chapters in the customs tariff chapter by chapter, really just to get the product HS code correct. And sometimes it is not very simple, right? Sometimes the product have different classification and components that might require some expert support for you to figure out what the HS code is. And so this is something that can be very simple depending on the product, but can also be complicated. But it's important that you get it right. I guess that's a message I want to get across. Yeah, and so oh yeah, so I have an example here with this link, but yes, you can try it out with the link that I provide in the deck. And so one beautiful thing about these, obviously there's HS code that help you to classify your product, but one of the beautiful things about import export especially as part of a Canadian economy, is that you can also benefit from free trade agreements. And so free trade agreements are a great way for products in a certain country to have preferential treatments when you export or import to a different country, right? And so, for example, and I'm not going to go into details here because it's a long topic, and I would encourage you to learn more about this as you embark on this process. But for example, Canada is in 15 is probably an outdated number, but in a number of free trade agreements around the world. And so if Canada has a free trade agreement with, let's say, Australia on a certain sector, on a certain product, whereas the US does not have the same free trade agreement that covers that same product, then when you ship to Australia, you will have preferred tax and duties on that item, and so that will make you a more competitive product versus your American competitor, for example. And so that's how free trade agreements is a great way for you to leverage and for you to stay competitive in the international trade. And so Canada, the government of Canada, both federally and provincially, work really hard to continue negotiating these free trade agreements so that Canadian companies can continue to be competitive across the globe. So it's a great way for you to also understand the landscape of the global market. And so a free trade agreement is a great topic that I will not be able to go in depth today, but it's something that when you start looking at importing, exporting, it's really important for you to familiarize yourself with. I'm just checking on time. Yes. Okay. So let's move to the next topic here about certificate of origin, right? So these are all kind of related to each other. But for you to be able to benefit from us, let's say, a free trade agreement that Canada has, let's say, with Australia in the previous example that we're talking about, it needs to be certified as a Canadian product, right? And so that's where a certificate of origin comes in. So it's the reason why this is important is, for example, if you are the one making, let's say, notebooks. I'm just making it up, but like you're making notebooks and you use all the pulp and paper, all the ingredients that you use to make these notebooks from Canada, it's going to cost you a lot more than you import that notebook from China, for example. And so the fact that the products are physically in Canada does not mean that it's a Canadian product, right? So if the notebook that you made using Canadian ingredients versus a notebook that, with 70% or 80% from China, they are not the same under the certificate of origin, right? So they will not enjoy the same duty and tariff treatments under the free trade agreements. And so, for example, with this same notebook, you're shipping them now to the US, right? And so if you ship this notebook to the US because of a free trade agreement that Canada and the US have with each other, this notebook that is made in Canada with Canadian inputs, they might be duty free, right? So you can ship across the border and you don't have to pay any tax on it, versus the notebook that is made with 80% of the input, or it's imported from China. Now it's being shipped to the US. It is going to be treated as a product with origin from China, and it will incur some duty and some tariffs, for example. And so in that sense, it's important that the certificate of origin is attached to a product when you're shipping it across the border, because yes, you cannot just buy, like, for example, buying things from China, bring it to Canada, and then ship it around the world and enjoy the same duty and tax treatments as a product made in Canada. And so the certificate of origin is issued by the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. And so there's some details that you have to supply to the chamber for them to be able to issue a certificate of origin for you. But yeah, it can get complicated depending on the nature of the product and how much transformation the product goes through in Canada, whether or not it can be considered Canadian or not. And I have had clients before who the product actually says that it's made in Canada. So you can actually get the product that says that it's made in Canada, but when it goes through customs to the US, in this case, it is solar panel for cars, for example, and most of the solar panels are made in China. And so even though the products say that it's made in Canada, but because of the components and there's limited transformation of the product from the time it comes from China to Canada going to the US, it's still subject to tariffs and duties as if it's a Chinese product. And so it can get quite complicated, but it's important for you to understand this concept of certificate of origin and the components of the products, that whether or not it would help the product benefit from duty and tax preferential treatments or not. Okay. And then we are going to go to the last topic of today, which is about transportation and logistics. And so transportation and logistics are really key considerations for exporters as they move goods across borders, right? And so there are many things to consider when you choose a mode of transportation. I worked with clients that have very stringent requirements when it comes to the products. So for example, if you are shipping frozen food, if you are shipping things like kombucha, it has to be temperature controlled the whole time. And so you do not want the kombucha to be out in the sun and then the bottle would explode, and it's like the worst case scenario. So there are many requirements for the products that you have that determines how the product's going to be moved. And so sometimes it has to be air freight, but if the timeline is not as critical, then using ocean freight, using trucks, using rail are a lot more cost effective. I mean, ocean is tricky sometimes depending on where you ship because of some of the issues with ocean shipments recently. However, I mean, generally, as a rule of thumb, air freight is always the most expensive and the most time efficient way of shipping products. The second consideration that you have to think about, it's also very important, is packing, right? And so I think we've talked about within our circle of advisors, we have a lot of clients that ship seafood outside of Canada going to Southeast Asia, for example, and packing seafood is really important, right? You want to make sure that, or even fresh fruits as well, like shipping cherries to another country from the Okanagan as an example. And so you need to make sure that the way you pack the product maintains the freshness of the products, but at the same time, it has to meet the requirement of the shipper, meets the requirement of the border services. And so that is really critical to consider as well. We talked about cost, we talked about special requirements, so like temperature control, and then insurance, right? Insurance is really important as well. And then the next topic I will touch on later is Incoterms. And so if you have not heard about Incoterms, you are going to be in for a treat. It's a little complicated, but Incoterms is very important to understand as well in the export process. And so, some of the services you can tap into when you figure out your transportation and your logistics service are the customs brokers and the freight forwarders. And so just in the benefit of time, I'm not going to go into details. However, sometimes they are together, right? Like some agencies, they act as both your customs broker and your freight forwarders. And sometimes as specific customs brokers and freight forwarders who are standalone. But the customs brokers essentially are the one who will help you with the HS code, the tariff classification. They are the ones who really understand the borders and the customs rules and the regulations. And so they are really the experts that you want to talk to when you want to really make sure that you are following the right regulations. Freight forwarders are logistics experts, and so they are the ones who consolidate shipments. So sometimes when you ship and you don't have a whole container of products, the freight forwarders can work with you to they call it less than truckload, and so they can combine shipments from different shippers to make it a container. And so that will be a little bit more cost effective for you as well. But yes, I talk about Incoterms. I am not going to go into the details of all of this. It is very, it is an eye chart. I'm sorry about that, but it is what it is. Like Incoterms are complicated, but what Incoterms is it is an internationally recognized standard of shipping. And so I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible. But for example, again, I am selling dog food from Canada to, let's say, to the Netherlands, right? And so I have to get these products out of my warehouse, going to the customs of Canada, clear it through Canada customs border, put it on a ship, and then it's gonna travel the ocean, go to the Netherlands, Rotterdam, for example. And then in Rotterdam, someone is gonna clear that shipment from the port of Rotterdam, put it on a truck, and then ship it to my distributor, right? So this whole process from my warehouse to my distributor's warehouse. And so the Incoterms is there to ensure that both myself and my customer knows where the seller's responsibility ends and where the buyer responsibility starts, right? And so you can see this little asterisk here, that's where the risk would transfer, right? So where do I have to buy insurance for my product until, and where does my customer have to start buying insurance for the rest of the journey, right? And so some of the most common ones, which I would really briefly speak about, which is FOB. So FOB is free on board. And so what that means is that the moment the goods get on to the shipment, so it has to get out of my factory, it goes to the truck going to the port of Vancouver, it gets on port. The moment it gets on the ship that leaves the port of Vancouver, then my risk ends and my buyer's responsibility takes over, right? And so from then on, goes to Rotterdam, wherever anything happens to that shipment, it is no longer my responsibility, right? So that's FOB. The other one that is popular also is Ex Works. So for someone who are new to exporting, I think this is something that you want to consider when you price your products, is you want to consider Ex Works as one of the way to price it, because Ex Works is really in favor of the seller, right? So the moment it leaves your factory, so you can see in the first line here, Ex Works, the moment it leaves your factory, it gets on the truck to go to the port of Vancouver, that the risk already transfers. And so maybe in this case, your buyer has to arrange for the truck to come to your factory to get the product, or you can do it, but at their cost, for example. And so, but the risk would transfer at that point. And so those are some of the main ones that you want to be aware of. But again, it's a complicated process, but it's important for you to understand. And Yeah, so this is something I will go over also very quickly, just in the interest of time. But when you are negotiating contract, another thing you want to negotiate beyond the Incoterms and other things is the payment term, right? And so how are you going to get paid when you're selling your product to someone in, let's say, the UK? And so as you start the relationship, it is important for you to be sure that this is the right customer, and you don't want to ship products and wait for 30 days and then see what happens, right? And so it is important that I always recommend clients, when it's a first shipment, you want to get the payment in advance, right? That's the best way of ensuring that you're selling to someone that's not going to default on the payment. If you cannot get the full payment in advance, you can get at least the amount of payment that will cover the cost, right? So maybe you can forego the margin in case something happens, but you need to cover the cost. But however, as time goes on, so in this order, it's like the more you know this customer, the more you've done business with them, the trust level increase. You can move to a letter of credit. You can go to, documentary draft. You can have an open account even with them. So you can just ship, and whenever the order comes, and then they would pay whenever the payment is due. And so these different payment terms is up for negotiation, but dependent on the trust level. So that's a lot of information for an hour, and I'm sure you might get hungry if you haven't had lunch because of the so much things that I've talked about today. But what do you do next, right? Like, what's the next step? Like, and now that you told me about all these different things, like, where do I begin, right? And so I would say, if you are eligible for our service, I would say Export Navigator is a great way to get started. It is a free of charge service for eligible businesses. It is funded by your tax dollars. And we would be sitting with you and understanding exactly where you are at and put together a plan with you. Of course, it's your business, you're doing the work, but we will help you navigate that process. And so I would say that would be the first next step that you can take, but also review the material today, look at some of the other resources that are available to you. And again, of course, attend other events of the Chamber of Commerce and make sure that you keep updated with what's happening. Again, Export Navigator is a government-funded program. We are gratefully acknowledging that it is funded by the province of BC through the BC Ministry of Jobs, Economic Development and Innovation, and through the federal government of Canada with Pacific Development Canada. And so thank you for spending the time with me this lunch hour, and I'm happy to take any questions now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tracey, for providing such great information for our members in attendance today. I've got a couple of questions in my Q&A. Somebody's asked, is there any such webinar scheduled for importing into Canada? We do not have any scheduled through the Chamber, but you're more than welcome to explore Global Affairs Canada's website. They might have something there. And then another question that I wanted to get to, Canadian Chamber of Commerce are not allowed to sign any certificate of origin with free trade agreement. How can we get it? So I think they're asking that the certificate of origin for for a country that we have a free trade agreement with, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce is not allowed to sign. And they're asking, how can we get one?
Okay, so yeah, without having the really specifics, I don't want to really kind of say something that is not accurate, but I think that well, generally, that is how you get certificates of origin is through the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. There might be some different rules depending on the product and whatnot, but I'm not sure exactly what you mean when you say that they are not allowed to sign with free trade agreement because it's kind of a two different things. The certificate of origin is meant for the product, right? So the product that you want to get a certificate of origin for. Free trade agreements are between countries, and so so the certificate of origin and the free trade agreements are two slightly different things. If you want to get in touch with me, actually I have my email at the very last slide. Yeah, I will put my email up in the screen. And yeah, why don't you get in touch with me and then we can discuss this in specific, because I'm not really understanding like why that would be the case. But yeah, there might be some specificities that we can dig into together.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so I have time for, I think, one quick question and one more question. So there's a question somebody's asked, to get the certificate of origin, how much percentage of the product is allowed to be from a different country? For example, 40% made in Canada, 60% made in China, and who decides this percentage, government or the exporter?
Yeah, so this is a great question. Unfortunately, it is not as simple as the percentage of the product. It also has some requirements in terms of the transformation of the product. So, for example, even if the product, all the ingredients come from China, but when it comes to Canada, it has gone through what they could consider significant transformations. So, for example, if you buy uh, like plastic pieces, for example, and then you come to Canada and you melt it and then you make it into something else. And so, if the nature of this ingredient that you bring in from China, it has significantly changed in terms of the functionality and what it does into something else, then even if 100% of it comes from China, it will still be considered a made in Canada product. And so it is a relatively complicated process to charge. At the end of the day, who decides whether or not it's made in, like the tariff and the duty? It is the border agent, right? And so you have to do the best of your ability to demonstrate that, okay, it has gone through transformation and it has this much of it is coming from it is now in Canada. However, at the end of the day, it is the Customs Border official who will make the final. And then you can appeal, of course, if you don't agree with it. But yeah, unfortunately, that is how it works.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Quick question, two super quick ones that we have in
Yeah.
the chat. What are the top countries and products that Canada exports?
Yes, so US is the largest trading partner that Canada exports to. After the US, I believe it would be China, India. Korea is one of the big ones as well. And so those are the main ones. I can also share in the follow-up if you really want to know the statistics, but I would believe that the mining is a really big one. Commodities is also really big. So we ship a lot of commodities. But yeah, I would say those are some of the main ones.
Okay, and then we have a follow-up. What are the top ports through which Canada exports? Seaports slash airports, etc.
I actually don't have the exact and like I don't have the answer. I don't want to say something that is wrong. I don't have the answer to this, but I will look into it and then I will get back to you if you want to reach out to me through my email. But I know that the Port of Vancouver is a very big port for Asia, as well as YVR. But I wouldn't, yeah, I don't want to say that that's like the top one, but they are really big ports for sure.
Thank you so much. And I'm just going to ask one super quick question just for the knowledge of our audience.
Yes.
Does the product have to be like a company that wants to join the Export Navigator program? Is their product allowed to be made outside of Canada?
Yeah, no, so it has to be a BC product or services for you to qualify as a client of Export Navigator.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tracy, for sharing such great information with us. And we hope that you've learned something today. I certainly have. And before we part for the day today, I would like to remind everyone that a few of our upcoming events. We've got Wednesday, July 10th, our first ever Richmond Chamber of Commerce Toastmasters Club. So if you're looking to increase your communication and leadership skills, join us. Tuesday, July 16th, we've got our monthly running event, 5 at 5, Ready, Set, Network. It's at 5 p.m. Thursday, July 25th, we've got our annual badminton tournament and networking dinner. It's great for team building. Thursday, August 15th, we've got another Lunch and Learn webinar, and that is presented by the Better Business Bureau, and we'll be talking about top scams targeting Canadians. I think that is a very interesting topic. We'd love to see you there. Once again, thank you so much for joining us and taking your lunch hour to learn something new. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach us. And if you'd like to connect with Tracy, her email is on the screen as well. And yeah, thank you again. We will be recording this and it will be available on our website. Thanks again. Bye-bye.